The first call came at dawn, not from Denisha, from a driver. He had been trying to reach the group for hours. He'd dropped two of them off at their Airbnb the night before. But Denisha hadn't been with them. She'd stayed behind with someone they met at the club. Now the driver was calling to ask one question. "Are you okay?" Because the man Denisha had left with, the man nobody knew anything about, had just been found dead. And she was in the seat next to him. How did we get here? You're watching Guilty Crime Files, where real cases involving ordinary people reveal warning signs too important to ignore. Like, subscribe, and share, because awareness could save a life. On March 2nd, 2026, police in Philipsburg on the Dutch Caribbean island of Sint Maarten responded to what looked like a car crash on Arlet Peters Road. A vehicle had overturned. Two people were inside. Neither one was breathing. But when investigators looked closer, they didn't find what they expected. The crash wasn't a crash. There were bullet holes in the vehicle. The car had been hit first, then it flipped. Within hours, the police force of Sint Maarten's major crimes team had reclassified the scene entirely. This wasn't an accident, it was a targeted ambush. One of the victims had been tracked, monitored, and hunted, not just that night, but across an entire criminal network stretching from Sint Maarten to Trinidad to the wider Caribbean underworld. The other victim had no idea any of it existed. She was 29 years old. She was from Miami. She had come to this island to celebrate her sister's birthday. Denisha Delancy grew up in Liberty City in Miami, Florida. Liberty City is a neighborhood that shaped you whether you wanted it to or not. The kind of place where people either leave and carry it with them or stay and become part of its story. Denisha left, at least partly. She went to Florida State University, earned her degree, and built a life. Friends and family described her the same way, over and over. Full of life. Someone who loved to travel. Someone who could walk into a room and make it feel like something was happening. She was not a public figure. She lived a regular life, surrounded by people who cared about her deeply. That's exactly why the story hit so hard when it came out. It didn't feel like a cautionary tale about someone living recklessly at the edge of danger. It felt like someone you knew. Someone who worked hard, finished school, loved her family, and saved up for a vacation. Denisha was close to her sister, Sincaria. The kind of close where you plan trips together. Where celebrating one person's birthday means both of you are on a plane. In early March 2026, they traveled to Sint Maarten for a birthday trip. They spent time on the beach. They went out at night. They had a private driver arranged. They were being careful. But somewhere in the middle of the celebration, somewhere between the music and the lights and the warmth of being somewhere beautiful, a decision was made. A small one, the kind that doesn't feel like a decision at all. At the time, nobody considered it important. Sint Maarten is two countries on one island. The northern half, Saint Martin, is French territory. The southern half, Sint Maarten, is Dutch. Together they form one of the smallest land masses in the world to be divided between two sovereign nations. The Dutch side has become a significant tourism hub in the Caribbean. Beaches, resorts, nightclubs, casinos. But beneath that surface, and investigators had been watching it for years, something else had been growing. In past years, federal officials had issued warnings about the island's drug trafficking and money laundering networks. Sint Maarten's geography, small, well-connected to major shipping lanes, accessible from multiple directions, made it useful for people moving product through the Caribbean corridor. The island had become a layover point for something much larger. And the man at the center of the March 2nd ambush had been embedded in that world for years. Quincy Damon Sylvester was a Trinidadian national who had established himself on the island. On the surface, he operated a PVC pipe installation and sales business on Welgelagan Road in Cahill. To anyone who didn't know what to look for, he was a businessman. A legitimate one, but investigators suspected otherwise. Sylvester reportedly used that legitimate-looking PVC pipe business as a front for illicit drug operations. Intelligence suggested his connections to the criminal underworld stretched far beyond Sint Maarten, that he maintained ties to the same networks involved in the recent shooting of Meshach Emmanuel, known as Plumpy Boss. a Trinidadian dancehall artist who had been shot on the island after a reported $100,000 bounty was placed on his head. The 6 and 7 gangs, originating in Trinidad, had expanded across the Caribbean. St. Martin had become part of their territory. Their rivalry played out not just in violence, but through music, diss tracks, and public provocation. Their leaders, some based as far as the United Kingdom and North America, used their resources to orchestrate hits and expand operations. Sylvester, according to investigators, was not a bystander in that world. He was a player. And by the evening of March 1, 2026, someone had already decided that his time was up. They had been watching. They were already in position. They just needed him to leave. Denisha had traveled with her sister Sincaria and a friend. Their first night out took them to the White Rabbit Club. It was the kind of place you end up when you're on vacation and the night is still young and someone says they know somewhere good. That's where they met Quincy Damon Sylvester. The sister reported that when the night ended, they decided to ride home with him instead of their private driver. They had already paid for a driver. They had already arranged a safe way back. But Sylvester offered, and in the logic of a night out in a warm place, far from home, with music still in your ears, it didn't seem like anything. The sister, along with their friend, were dropped off at their Airbnb. Denisha stayed with Sylvester. Nobody pulled her back. Nobody said don't go. It was one of those moments that only reveals itself later, from the outside, when you can see what everyone in it couldn't. What Denisha didn't know, what her sister didn't know, what their driver didn't know, was that Sylvester had been followed that night from the moment he arrived at the club. Surveillance footage recovered from the Nowhere Special nightclub showed unknown individuals closely monitoring Sylvester in the hours leading up to the attack. They weren't there for a night out. They were waiting, watching his movements, watching who he was with, watching what time he was likely to leave. The surveillance evidence strongly pointed to a carefully orchestrated hit. The people who had ordered this weren't improvising. The route Sylvester would take home, Arlette Peters Road, also known as Old Cake House Road, running through Philipsburg, was already known to them. By the time Denisha got into that car, the men who would kill Sylvester were already in position somewhere along that road. Her name wasn't in any plan. Her name wasn't in any network. Investigators would later confirm she had no apparent involvement in criminal activity. She was 29 years old, she was on vacation, she was in the wrong car. No one there that night, not Denisha, not her sister, not their driver, realized what the next few hours would bring. It was the early morning hours of March 2, 2026. Sylvester's SUV moved through the dark on Arlette Peters Road. The road was quiet. Then it wasn't. The vehicle was ambushed. Gunfire caused the SUV to flip, killing both occupants. When police arrived, the scene looked, at first, like a traffic accident. A vehicle overturned, 2 people inside, not moving. But the investigators who arrived quickly noticed something that didn't fit. The damage was wrong. What police initially considered a traffic accident was quickly reclassified as a double homicide upon discovering bullet-riddled evidence. The car hadn't simply lost control. It had been hit. The major crimes team was called. And the investigation that followed would begin pulling back layers that reached far beyond St. Martin. Hours after the shooting, the group's private driver reached out to check on them. He told them that the man Denisha had been with was found dead. Her sister's world stopped. The driver said he'd heard a man was found. He didn't know the full picture yet. Police had discovered Quincy Damon Sylvester shot dead inside his vehicle. And Denisha was in the seat beside him, killed the same way. A report was made. Investigators confirmed both Quincy Damon Sylvester and Denisha Delancy were dead. Sincaria, Denisha's sister, had made it back to the Airbnb safely. She returned to Miami. But she didn't bring her sister home the way she'd expected. The family had to bring Denisha back in a casket. What was meant to be a joyful birthday trip became a loss that shocked not just her family, but people across social media. Investigators, meanwhile, were already working, because whoever had planned this had been careful. But careful people leave traces. On the same day as the shooting, the police force of St. Martin conducted targeted house searches at several locations across the island. They weren't guessing. They already had a picture of who Sylvester was and what world he moved in. The surveillance footage from the nightclub gave them something concrete: faces, patterns, timing. By March 4, 2026, just 2 days after the ambush, officers arrested a Trinidadian national identified only by the initials AH in connection with the double homicide. 1 person in custody. But authorities were careful about what they said publicly. The main suspect, they confirmed, was still at large. All individuals believed to be involved in the plot were from Trinidad. The police force of St. Martin, working closely with the prosecutor's office, continued to pursue multiple leads and expected additional arrests as the investigation progressed. The investigation pointed towards something larger than a single grudge. Sylvester's connections to the criminal underworld extended beyond St. Martin. Sources suggested ties to the same networks involved in the Plumpy Boss shooting, further highlighting the interconnected nature of violent rivalries operating across the Caribbean. These were not random acts. Gang leaders and financiers, some based as far as the United Kingdom and North America, were using their resources to orchestrate hits across the Caribbean. St. Martin had become a theater for their wars, and Denisha Delancy had no idea any of it existed. The surveillance footage was the clearest indicator of premeditation. Footage recovered from the Nowhere Special nightclub showed that unknown individuals heavily monitored Sylvester shortly before his death. This evidence strongly pointed to a carefully orchestrated hit. The attackers had tracked him from the time he left the club. They knew his vehicle, they knew his route, they moved with precision. Denisha, authorities stressed, was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. An innocent bystander caught in a violent plot. That phrase, "the wrong place at the wrong time," is the kind of phrase that sounds simple, clean, like it explains something. It doesn't. It just marks the edge where intention ends and randomness begins. The men who planned this attack didn't factor in that Sylvester would leave the club with someone. They didn't know her name. They didn't care. She was a variable they never considered. And that is its own kind of horror. As of the time this case was reported, the main suspect remained at large. Police stressed the need to prevent retaliatory violence and urged anyone with information to come forward. The case remained open. The network, to the extent investigators had mapped it, stretched further than one island. A visitation for Denisha was held on Friday, April 3, 2026, at Mitchell Funeral Home's chapel in Miami. A celebration of life followed the next day, April 4th, at 93rd Street Community Baptist Church, Liberty City, the neighborhood where she grew up, the community that knew her before she was a name in a news report. She was remembered for her smile, for being someone who loved life, who loved travel, who loved every moment. People who knew her said, "This could be anybody." And the online response to her story reflected exactly that. The grief was enormous, but so was the debate. Some people focused on the decision to leave the group. Some focused on the failure to recognize Sylvester for what he was. Some focused on the broader dangers that tourists face in the Caribbean. Travel experts noted that when going abroad and traveling outside tourist zones, it is always best to travel in a group. Avoid wearing jewelry or carrying valuable items. Share locations and travel itineraries with trusted people. And maintain situational awareness. All of that is true. None of it brings her back. There's a version of this story that gets told as a warning. Don't leave your group, don't get in a stranger's car, don't wander off from your designated driver. All of that is fair. But there's another version of this story that requires a harder look. Some journalists and commentators noted that coverage of the incident raised questions about how Caribbean crime is reported, specifically how quickly certain narratives took hold before the investigation was complete, and how stories like these often crowd out other, more complex realities about the islands involved. St. Martin is not inherently dangerous. Millions of tourists visit Caribbean islands every year and return home without incident. What the Denisha Delancy case revealed is not that the Caribbean is a war zone. What it revealed is that criminal networks operating out of Trinidad had embedded themselves in St. Martin's nightlife, economy, and underworld, and that the same island where families take beach vacations had also become a location where rival factions ordered hits on each other. Sylvester moved through that world every day. He smiled at people. He gave rides. He walked through the same clubs where tourists were celebrating birthdays. And the men who wanted him dead were patient. They were watching. Nobody at that club that night could have seen what the cameras later captured. The case drew attention to the risks faced by tourists in the Caribbean amid ongoing issues with transnational crime, gang activity, and drug-related violence in St. Martin. Denisha Delancy did nothing wrong in any of the ways that usually fill these investigations. She wasn't careless in the big ways people imagine when they hear a story like this. She was on a birthday trip with her sister. She had a driver. She went out, she met someone, she got in a car. That was it. The violence that found her had been planned for someone else, months or years in the making, in rooms and networks she never knew existed and never would have believed surrounded her that night. Her celebration of life was held at a church in Miami on a Saturday afternoon in April. Her family was there. The people who loved her were there. And somewhere, the men who ordered the hit that killed her were still out there. The main suspect, as of this recording, has not been found. Thanks for watching Guilty Crime Files. These were cases involving ordinary people, and that's exactly why they matter. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because the right knowledge could save a life. Stay alert, and I'll see you in the next file. If the danger was invisible to everyone in that club that night, how many people right now are sitting across from someone whose world they cannot see?